Okay, hearing. There's something called the bony labyrinth. So your sense of hearing and balance are inside your skull here, and and inside that skull there's a labyrinth, and it's mostly this section here, and it's got like a bunch of tunnels through your skull, and it contains all the sensors for the auditory system, and here your vestibular system, which provides your sense of balance. And you can see here more clearly that this gray stuff is the skull, and all this stuff is inside the skull. This is your eardrum, and this is the canal that goes through to your ear. Okay, inside these tunnels, the inside is lined with a membrane. This is this black line here, and then on just between the bone and the membrane is a fluid called perilymph, and this perilymph is very similar to extracellular fluid. So everything that surrounds all your cells. Inside the tunnels, you've got endolymph, a different kind of fluid, and that's similar to intracellular fluid, so the things inside your cells, but and it's high in potassium and low in sodium. And this is the stuff that bathes the hair cells, both in the hearing part of the system and in the balance part of the system. The other unique thing about this endolymph is that it has a charge of plus 80 millivolts, and we'll discover soon why that's important. Now, the reason the auditory system and the vestibular system is close together is because they have a common origin. This system developed in fish first, and in terms of something called the lateral line organ. And what it is a series of tubes that let water flow through the tubes, and inside there is the same similar hair cells that you find in humans. And these communicate with surrounding water. And they do two things. One is, if there's a noise in the water, like something moving, that produces waves. And those waves are then sensed by this organ. The other thing, of course, is as the fish moves forward, water flows through these tubes, and so it senses the motion of the fish. So this is the beginnings of the auditory system and the vestibular system. They derive from the same thing, but as the creatures evolved, they found that they could produce better systems devoted for a particular, for either auditory or for vestibular. Now, the vestibular system has two parts to it. One is the canals, the other is this thing. Now, the canals sense rotation, okay? Rotation. I want all of you to rotate your head from left to right, okay? You are activating your canals now. The other thing that you have is the otolith. So sitting on top of these canals is the otolith. And it's responsible for something called translation, moving in a straight line. That's one of the things. So instead of rotating your head, I want all of you to bob your head forward and backward. Okay? That's called translation. You notice there's a difference between the two. And so there's special organs for measuring that versus the rotations. It also senses which way is down. Okay? So in this case, this person is upside down, and the otolith is what tells this person what its position is relative to gravity. Now, within the otoliths, you've got two parts to it, something called the utricle and the ventricle. And these things are like two egg-shaped structures, and it's the inside of the egg that's important, because inside the egg you've got a sort of a widening and thickening, and on that thickening you've got hair cells poking out, thousands of them. And the same thing here in the saccule. And they then project down, as did the auditory system, along the eighth nerve to the brain. Now, the hair cells project into something like jello. And the hair cells are like the hair cells you saw in the auditory system. They have this crew cut, and they have a tall condylicium. In addition to this jello, we've got a bunch of stones that are scattered on top of the jello. And this is to make the whole thing heavier. And when something is heavier, it wants to stay still when your head moves. So when this thing stays still, it bends these hair cells that are attached to your body that is moving. So this moves, it stays still. And the more stones you have, the stiller it will stay. Again, you have these flaps that on the top that open and close as you translate or go upside down. And potassium flows into those things. Now, the additional thing to remember here, but it applies also to the auditory system, is that you have this 80 millivolt charge in the fluid over here, and a plus 80. And the potassium atoms are also positively charged. So in a sense, this positive charge pushes the potassium into the cell, which is negatively charged. Now, when you translate, as you did when you bob your head. Okay, the firing frequency of a particular cell will be increasing or decreasing depending on which way the condylom is bending. Okay, and you can see that in this position it's high, in this position it's low. But in addition, you can see that it's never quite silent. The lowest it gets to in the mid position when it's not moving is about 80 action potential, 100 action potential per second. Now, here's what happens when you tilt your head. Okay? Again, when you, like for example, if you were to go upside down, you'd also bend your hair cells, and that would tell you where your head is positioned with respect to gravity, which way down is. Okay, this is a little bit complicated, so I'll go slowly through it. So here's your hair cell. Here's your hair cell looking from the top, and you can see that there's a bigger one called the condylom. Okay, here and here. And I have an arrow drawn in the direction of the condylom. So this points to where the condylom is. So this diagram here is a sort of a short form of this whole thing. And it tells you that the condylom in the utricle and the saccule are pointing in all kinds of different directions. Okay. The important thing here is that the utricle here is on the surface of this cube, so it's horizontal. So it will fire whenever the head goes. These hair cells will bend when the head goes forward or backwards or side to side. If you just go up and down, there's nothing to bend the hair cells. It has to be moving forward or backward to bend. Straight up does nothing. The saccule does the same, but it's on the side of the head. So it's in the vertical plane, and so it's very good at sensing whether you're moving up or down, or forward and backwards. Now, the way it figures out which way you're going is which one of these is bent most, and that tells the brain which way you're moving. So, for example, let's take this saccule. Okay, let's see this saccule. It's horizontal, so it's on the side. So, if this cell is firing, that means you're moving backwards. That will bend this thing towards the condylom when you're moving backwards. When you're moving forward, you'll bend this cell towards the condylom. Okay, I think I just explained all that. Okay, we'll move on to the canals. Again, they're the ones that measure rotation. When your head rotates from side to side, or your whole body rotates from side to side. And there are 6 canals in total, 3 on one side, 3 on the other. Notice that each canal is perpendicular to each other. So you can fit a box in here, and the box will form the bottom and the two sides of, of, of these canals. Okay? The same thing here. You place a box in here, and again, the bottom, one side, the other side would fit in there. The canals, again, have endolymph in them, and that endolymph, for example, fills this whole canal, like the green stuff that you see here. But in one part of the canal, there's a little widening. It's called the ampulla. And inside the ampulla, you've got this thing which seals the canal, okay? So fluid can't get through it. And that's called the cupula. And inside the cupula, again, you've got hair cells and a kinocilium on one side of all the hair cells, to tell you what direction you're moving. So all the kinocilium in the cupula are in this direction. Now, so when you turn your head back and forth, the fluid pushes against the hair, the cupula, and bends it. And in bending it, it also bends the hair cells, and the hair cells increase or decrease their firing rate. Okay. So each of these canals have sort of a best rotation that will activate them the most. You can, if you look at this one, which is the horizontal canal, it's activated. This is the one on the left side of your brain head. And you notice that if you turn to the left, it fires most, where the one on the opposite side decreases its firing rate. In contrast, when I turn to the right, all this hair cells in this canal fire, and the ones on the opposite horizontal canal become more quiet. Now, what happens when I rotate in this along the plane of the right anterior canal? So when I bend my head in this a little bit funny direction, you notice that it's not your head straight down, but it's sort of towards this right eye. Okay, that's in the plane of this canal. And then it fires, but at the same time, the one on the opposite side, but not the anterior, but the posterior canal, decreases its firing rate because it is also in the same plane. And the same thing happens when I activate this. Oops, I have my mouse in the wrong spot. Here, if I turn my head in this direction, that goes, increases, the other side decreases. Now, so the canals are organized in pairs, okay? And when one of the pairs gets increases in activity, the other of the pair decreases in activity. So it's like a push-pull system. At the same time, you'll notice that so there's a change in activity in two of the canals, but all the other canals, the other four canals, are silent because they're not in the plane of rotation. Okay, I think I covered that. Okay, so what do the canals do? Well, canals give you your sense of balance. They send a signal down to your legs to help you contract your foot so you stay upright. They go to your trunk to make sure it is in the correct angle, and you can also use your arms to help you maintain balance. But one of the most important things it does is keep your eyes stable. And a stable eye is an eye that can see clearly. So if you notice that if the eye wasn't stationary in space, it would have retinal slip on the back of the eye. But the VOR, vestibular ocular reflex, the canals, they keep the eye, or try to keep the eye, completely stationary in space. I have a drone. I play with it. That's one of my hobbies. And it's got a camera, and it's got 3 gimbals. One that turns the camera left and right, one up and down, and one turns about its axis. And there's a sensor in the drone that tells which way the drone is moving, and it moves the camera exactly in the opposite direction, and I get perfectly stable pictures with it, even though the wind is shaking the drone and it's doing all kinds of funny things. So that's the same thing that's happening here. If the gain of the VOR, that is the ratio of how much the head is turning versus how much the eye is turning, is exactly -1, then the image is perfectly stable on the back of the eye. Okay, what's the circuit for doing this? Well, a circuit is rather simple and short, and that's good because it means it'll react quickly to whatever your head is doing. And you've got hair cells in your cupula, and then a synapse in something called the vestibular nucleus, and then it crosses over to the other side and activates neurons here. They're motor neurons. And these motor neurons, one of them goes to this muscle, and the other goes to the same muscle on the opposite side. And of course, the canal over here is just the mirror image. So you can see here, as I turn to the right, this canal gets activated, and that sends a signal to the lateral rectus and the medial rectus. Now, I've made a mistake in this diagram, and I couldn't get it fixed in time for the lecture. Can anyone spot what the mistake is? It's a big mistake. Yes?
The eyes should be moving.
That's right.
Toward the head.
Yeah. The eyes should be stationary in space, So the eyes, the lateral rectus and the medial rectus are activated. They should turn the eye. And I couldn't get it to turn the eye in this diagram. Okay, this is what happens on the opposite side. So whenever this side is turning to the right, this side decreases its activity and in turn relaxes this muscle and this muscle. And so one muscle is contracting and the other one's relaxing, not impeding the rotation that the brain wants to do. Now, if everything is working right, okay, the head rotates, the vestibular ocular reflex rotates the eye, and you see a stable image through the eye. However, the VOR is often not perfect for a variety of reasons. And so what helps it is something called the optokinetic reflex, or OCR. And it assists the VOR. The optokinetic reflex is something that comes through the eye and through MT, and we'll look at the circuit in detail later on. Okay, something for all of you to do. We need some exercise to keep you guys awake. If you could all stand up and try to stand on one foot and see how long you can maintain your balance. 1, 2, 3, start. Woo. Everyone's quite balanced. Okay, now do the same with your eyes closed. Okay, we have a problem. So, vision is important for balance. Vision is important to sit down. Vision before you fall down. Okay, so the VOR, the vestibular ocular reflex alone can't do it. It needs the help of vision. And if this was big enough, and those screens were big enough, you might sense motion when this is turning left or right. And so it can override what the VOR. If the VOR is saying you're still, but the signal from the visual system, the OKR will might tell you that you're moving, mislead you, and you see that often happening when you're stopped in front of a car and it starts to move, and you think your car is backing up, or you're sitting in a subway car, and the subway car across from you starts moving. You think your car is moving. Okay, let's answer a few questions. The answer here are obvious, so I won't ask you to bang the table, but we'll just go through this one at a time. So what modalities contribute to your sense while you're standing up? And of course, the vestibular system is very important. So the sway of the body activates your leg muscles and contracts it in a way that keeps you stable. Touch. What about touch? Well, yes, that's important as well. The pressure on the soles of your foot tell you which way you might be leaning. If you're leaning forward, the pressures increases under your toes. If you're leaning backwards, it increases on your heels. Proprioceptive receptors. Yes, they also tell you that whether help you stand, because your leg muscles get stretched, and then you can, with your spinal cord reflexes, react to contract them and become upright again. And finally, not finally, but vision. Also, we saw that helps. You closed your eyes, you became more unstable. And finally, the auditory system, well, it depends what the sound was. If the sound was something that you knew its location of, it might help you a little bit to maintain your stability. Then why do you get dizzy? Well, this is a bit faster than it normally happens, but you notice that, okay, here we begin the rotation, we push the cupola, but then we keep rotating, and the cupola comes back to its normal upright position. You're still rotating, okay? And your hair cells signal that you're stationary, so that during a long rotation, your hair cells will signal no activity or that you're not rotating. So if you, I don't know why this is like that. Okay. If you had your eyes closed, that's you saw a moment, and then you opened them, the visual system would suddenly tell you that you're moving. Okay. The vestibular system became silent because your eyes were closed and you were turning for a long time, and you would feel a sort of a discrepancy between what your vestibular system is telling you and what your visual system is telling you, and you would feel dizzy. Now, you'll notice that when you have just an optokinetic response, that is, the scene moves, but gradually the OKR stabilizes the image. You see it moving faster and then slows down. So it takes time for the OKR to kick in, but eventually it will stabilize the image. But it also will generate this false perception of motion, as I mentioned. Now, the input for this OKR comes from the structure that we studied way back in the beginning of the term, the MSTD. So remember, there was one part of it that of MST that was sensing how objects are moving around you. Another part was telling you how you were moving from the optic flow that it was seeing. And this optic flow could be in all kinds of directions, and you, depending which way you were going, and it would mislead you as to what direction you're turning. Now, in the normal situation, you have a combination of these signals in the vestibular nucleus. And then they're sent to the thalamus, and then the somatosensory cortex. And it's in the somatosensory cortex that you have this feeling of motion. Now, one of the good things is that many people don't get dizzy when they keep their eyes open, okay? When you turn your head back and forth and you're standing, you don't get dizzy. And that's because of this important property. The vestibular system acts quickly, but as the cupula bends back to its straight position, it stops signaling. In contrast, the visual system doesn't activate immediately, but gradually builds up. But when you combine the two, okay, you in most times get the true sense of your motion, and you don't get dizzy. Now, what's happening here? This is a ballet dancer, and she's doing something strange. This ballet dancer avoids becoming dizzy by, okay? And this time we'll use the hit the table as hard as you can. Suppress the signal from the inner ear to the brain. That's how this dancer. Nope. Provide a fixed focus for the eyes. Prevent the head from turning continuously. You're the only one that got it right. Okay? A fixed focus is just momentarily. You can see here in slow motion that what's happening is that she tries to keep her head stationary for as long as she can, and then quickly flicks her head around and again points in the same direction. So she's never turning her head constantly in the same direction. And so her cupula doesn't have time to flip back to its normal, to the position that tells her she's not turning. Now, often when you get dizzy, you feel nauseous. If you were, for example, this person here inside the cabin of this boat that's going up and down, often you'd feel nauseous. And there's several sort of contentious reasons for why you get nauseous, but the most plausible one, I think, is because there's a conflict between the signal coming from your vestibular system and the one coming from your visual system. And because of that conflict, the brain senses that you might be poisoned. That's the brain's reaction, that something is poisoning the brain. And of course, you elicits vomiting to clear the poison. When the astronauts go up in space, their first day is usually feeling nauseous because, again, there's the sense of gravity is gone, but the visual system tells them they're moving. So often they get this conflict between what one is saying and the other saying. Now, the best solution for this gentleman here is to get out of his cabin. The cabin says, okay, the visual system says, I'm not moving, but the vestibular system says, I'm going up and down. So the two are saying the opposite things. If he goes outside and sees the boat, the sea going up and down, and his vestibular system senses the same thing, there is no discrepancy, and the nausea disappears. The same thing happens when you get car sick. The worst thing you can do to get car sick is to sit in the back of the car and read a book or look at an iPad. The best that you can do not to get car sick is sit in the front of the car and look outside the front window. That prevents the conflict. Okay. Now, sometimes the VOR needs to get adjusted because the gain isn't perfect. As life goes by, neurons die or malfunction, and so you need something to adjust the VOR. Often, if you get a big change in your prescription of your glasses, if you wear glasses that increase or decrease the magnification, you'll initially feel dizzy because the amount of churn the VOR should produce is different for different glasses. Now, also, if you have an abnormal VOR, when you're jogging or walking, this is what you'll see if your VOR stops working. You, for example, will not be able to read this sign here under the windows. Now, this defect is, again, very transient. So the VOR will continuously adjust it and repair the damage, and that can take hours or days. So the even a big change in the VOR can be adjusted. And what adjusts it? What adjusts it is this structure here called the cerebellum. You have here the pathway we described previously, the one through the vestibular nucleus and the motor neurons to the eye. And that's called the direct pathway. Then there's an indirect pathway that goes up through the mossy fibers, and then those mossy fibers become these parallel fibers, and these parallel fibers make synapses with this Purkinje cell. This Purkinje cell is neat. It's like a tree that's been flattened. So, and these parallel fibers, thousands of them, go make synapses with different Purkinje cells and different parts of their dendrites. Now, the VOR adjusts the difference between the direct pathway and the indirect pathway, or the cerebellum adjusts the difference between these two and tries to maintain an optimal value. Now, when the VOR is not working, there's image slip on the eye. So whenever the head turns, there's retinal slip, and that activates this thing called a climbing fiber. And the climbing fiber is, again, neat because what it does, it's like a vine that envelops all these branches of the tree of this Purkinje cell. So it makes many connections to this Purkinje cell. And that makes it an excellent teacher. So whenever there's slip, there's something wrong, so I gotta go here to this cell and produce a change in activity. And what it's waiting for is an action potential to come along this parallel fiber. And when this cell the climbing fiber fires, and the parallel fiber fires at the same time, when there's like congruency, you can see this flash of light, and that flash of light changes the connection to the Purkinje cell. So step one is something goes wrong with the VOR. That produces retinal slip. That retinal slip activates climbing fibers, and those climbing fibers then wait for the parallel fiber to produce an action potential at the same time. When this happens, it changes the strength of the connection. That then it stabilizes the VOR, so the VOR becomes normal again. And when it becomes normal again, the slip stops. And when the slip stops, then of course there's no more adjustments. So it's sort of an automatic system. If things go wrong, you get retinal slip. Retinal slip produces this climbing fiber activity. Climbing fiber activity fixes everything, and the system becomes optimal again. So the cerebellum is like a repair shop, and fixes up this reflex, your VOR, but it also fixes up many other reflexes. For example, your ability to stand. It changes the connections to your leg muscles. And that's it.